It's been a minute. It's been a while since I've been on. Don't have a lot to say today. Just some random thoughts on God and country. Right after this. So I don't think we've talked since before Easter. So I want to say I hope you had a wonderful celebration, wonderful holiday. I do want to go back to my picture because it's just too good not to talk about. My opening thumbnail. On the left, you see Jason, a boot connoisseur at the famous boot maker. We were in San Angelo, but they also have one in Fort Worth. This is from ML Letty's, and the foot you see is mine, getting measured for some boots. Gift of my brother Steve. And Wendy and I went to Texas for our anniversary trip, 27th anniversary trip. We wanted to see the full solar eclipse, which you see in the middle picture. That's a picture I took during full totality. It was a very cloudy day in Texas. We were lucky to even get that glimpse of it. And then what you see to the right, the far right, is some of the eggs that Peyton and I colored with our Eggbot for Assyrian Egg Wars during Easter. And I wish I could tell you I'm holding the winning egg. That was my egg. Peace did not reign on Easter. Wendy actually decimated us, both Peyton and I. She was 6-1 in Egg Wars and went on to claim victory. So there you have it. Coming back over here for a minute. I just wanted to welcome you all back. I won't be long today. Random thoughts on God and country. Wendy and I and Peyton saw a movie yesterday that was called Civil War. It anticipates turmoil in the United States based on the polarization of that's taking place, and it was one of those movies that you think about for the next 24 hours and might keep you up a little bit. It, for example, what do I want to say about it? I want to say a few things about it. It's well worth seeing. It's a movie unlike I've ever seen. I think it touches a little too close to home. I have a family member who doesn't really he's a history buff, but doesn't really like the Civil War era because he doesn't like Americans killing Americans. And that's how I felt watching this movie. Movie is about an authoritarian president who is trampling the Constitution into his third term. So he's extended into a third term, and he has abolished the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And there are states that are responding to the tyranny, and it has broken out into a civil war. And a group of 4 journalists, 2 of them photojournalists, are headed to D.C. in the hopes of interviewing the president before the obvious happens. And the obvious in this movie is that the president, spoiler alert, well, I won't give you a spoiler alert, just go watch the movie. But the movie brings up a number of things that are worthy of talking about in our age. I was saying to Wendy, there seems to be this massive disconnect with people who are following Christ and how that is reflected in their political decisions, or in what they're not even so much in what they're for, but in what they're capable of overlooking. In other words, it's surprising to me to see so many Christians who proudly wear the mantle of Christ, who are so fully embracing a Machiavellian the ends justify the means manner. In other words, if they're willing to embrace things that are both contrary to the faith and actually, contrary to the founders, to accomplish political ends. And this movie brings up that question too in subtle yet not ambiguous ways. I think it's worth seeing. It's worth starting a conversation about. I said to Wendy too after the movie that I'm kind of shocked, because this director and writer has kind of a vision of America about what could happen. I don't think it will happen, but I am kind of shocked that we went through the '60s and the '70s, and there really was a strong protest movement in our country through really the '50s, '60s, and '70s. And some of it, of course, we know was anti-war. It was against the Vietnam War, and some of it was for racial justice or for women's rights to vote and in other areas. And you see the civil rights protests, and you see the flower power in the '60s against the war and so forth. You see rock and roll acts or maybe punk musicians taking a strong stand against authoritarianism or, really being a voice of change, whether it be a Bob Dylan song or what have you. And I said to Wendy, it's shockingly silent in our time. I mean, there's this one movie that just comes out called Civil War, and there's a couple documentaries out there, and there's a handful of maybe Republican politicians or talking heads who are kind of willing to stand up and say, "Wait a minute, we need to check. We need to put a check on this because this is something smells here. Something's wrong here." Just a thought. I'm not overtly political. I don't want to make this a statement about politics. It's more a reflection about Christianity and really how surprised I am about the current state of what passes for Christianity in the West today. That's delicious. Easter was predictable. Breaks down between atheists versus Christians, and Christians who are sure about their apologetics, and atheists who are sure that it's all just a legend, and it misses the vast majority of us that exist between those two poles and are comfortable with their faith and comfortable with their doubt, with their agnosticism in areas. And there's a Christianity that wants to give everyone an answer for everything, including trans athletes and all kinds of things that you may or may not consider are really vital parts of the faith. But there are a vast amount of Christians that don't look to their faith as an answer for everything or to everything, but as a comfort. And some people look at Christianity and they call it a crutch, or they call faith a crutch. Oh, you're just using this. And I don't have a problem with that. I think we all need a crutch in this world. I think we could lean on each other's shoulders as we try and traverse our way through our time here, because it is a difficult path, and sometimes we do need to hear a lullaby. What's wrong with singing a lullaby to a child who needs a good night's sleep? And yet that's not completely a good answer. There's this famous war of words between the usual suspects, the hardened atheist and the tone-deaf Christian. And I won't mention their names, but a famous spokesperson for atheism, who happens to be a rather impressive scientist, said one day that he felt that theism is a bedtime story for people who are scared of the dark. And the response to that was a famous apologist who happens to be one of the world's great mathematicians, who rushed to the defense of theism and said, well, atheism is just a fairy tale for people who are scared of the light. Now, what would I tell you about that? I actually think there's truth in both those statements. And I would actually tell you that neither of those statements is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I think there's partial truth in both statements. I guarantee you that I, or even that particular atheist, can get the theist who responded that atheism is a fairy tale for people who are scared of the light. I guarantee you I could get that guy to admit that 99% of theism is indeed a response to fears of death or mortality or or mortality or other things, because that theist happens to be a Christian and he believes that the vast majority of faiths on this earth are wrong and he's right. So he would agree with the atheist about all the wrong faiths. He would say, yes, Zoroastrianism rose because of A, B, and C. Or he would say, yes, Mohammedanism, or emperor worship, or animism in Africa. He could give natural reasons why men erred into religion in those areas, and those are all theists. And I think I could even get the hardened atheists to admit that there are a subset of anti-theists who do not want to believe that they're accountable to anything higher than themselves, that there's truth there. It might be a really minor truth. In other words, it might be just a handful of people. I don't think that most unbelievers are unbelievers because they actually believe in a God and they just don't want to be accountable to him, or they don't want to stand in front of judgment or something like that. I actually think the majority of unbelievers just believe that we live in a physical universe and not a physical and a metaphysical one. And yet, this is the conversation. They believe this, and we believe this, and never shall the twain meet. And I actually think there's a lot more proximity to the human condition that we just don't consider when we get into sides. One of the things I loved about the movie, and this isn't a movie that you come out and say, wow, that was great. It was a dark movie. It's kind of like when people ask me what I thought of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. You don't come out of The Passion of the Christ and say, wow, that was awesome, because it's depicting something that is solemn and tragic and sad, and it's a great injustice and cruelty and all that, but it was so well done that sometimes you might get carried away if your vocabulary isn't strong enough to relate the awe that you felt after you saw it, or whatever you felt after you saw it, and you just came out and said it's great, and then you catch yourself and you say, well, wait a minute. One of the things that I liked about this is something that troubled me before I went to see it, and that is this idea that in the movie, the states that are rebelling against this authoritarian president, the leading states are California and Texas. And, a modern student of political science would say that would never happen. Those two states couldn't be further apart on the political spectrum. One is really red and one is really blue. And Wendy and I, when we went to Texas, were kind of alarmed. We had to go through a checkpoint where they asked if we're U.S. citizens. and we are, and yet it was really uncomfortable for us to be stopped, and they looked in our car and they asked, "Are you U.S. citizen?" They didn't ask for our papers, but it kind of felt like we were going through, East to West Berlin. But anyway, I kind of like that the director put California and Texas together in this movie, because basically he's making a statement, and he's saying, look, this isn't really truly about red versus blue, this Civil War. This is about something that is more sacred than political affiliation. And that is those institutions that protect and that nurture freedom, which are above political party. The founders saw this. They saw political parties as a necessary evil as they grew out of what the founders planted. But that requires people in the red mindset or the blue mindset to say, is there something that my side could do that I would say, no, that's wrong? And even though it might help our political adversaries for me to say this, I'm not going to allow this to happen on my watch. This is too sacred to sacrifice for short-term political gain, or one campaign or two campaigns, or the control of Congress or the control of the White House or what have you. There is a point where I will not look the other way if my side is suggesting these means to get to that end. And we're seeing this question take place in the headlines. We're seeing this take place in our own houses, at our own dinner tables for Thanksgiving and so forth. And these conversations are happening. And some of us are surprised at just how many are willing to say, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. I'm losing my lights now, so I'll keep it short. But I will say, it's a movie that I think is worth your time. Some of you might get angry after you see it. Some of you might get sad. I got sad after I saw this movie, and it provoked thought and interest. I'd like to see it again to help me metabolize the more subtle points. And yet, I do think it leaves some questions for us to answer. And there is a crossover, whether you want to believe it or not, between our faith and the way we live our faith as a neighbor. And I don't just mean neighbors to people who live here. I don't just mean neighbors to fellow citizens, but neighbors to immigrants or undocumented workers or illegal immigrants, whatever you call them. How are we to respond to them? Not as Americans, but as Christians. How are we to respond to our neighbors who don't think the same as us and don't vote the same way and have different priorities and even principles than I do as a follower of Christ? How am I supposed to act and react to the fact that I, as a citizen of heaven on the planet Earth, as my father was fond of saying, happen to live in a pluralistic society where Christian, Muslim, Jew, agnostic, atheist, and other faiths live together as fellow citizens, or in the very least, as neighbors in this time and in this place. I would like to see followers of Christ respond more to the words and example of Christ than we do when it comes to the really critical areas of how are we going to act and how are we going to speak to others in this very dire time. So anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts. If you go see the movie, text me, DM me, what have you. Give me a call if you have my number. Other than that, we'll be back next week with Church Without Walls. That happens to be a little bit more topical than what today was. But I just wanted to say hello, say I haven't forgotten about you. And we've had a lot going on. I've missed this side of the conversation. I know I've heard from a number of you wondering where I've been. I'll try and be back regularly. I will say this, some people have asked why I have done less and less work with scientists who happen to be Christian. And that is because I've kind of think that's an important place to be, and it's an important topic. And yet, when I look at it further, I actually think that the biggest problem with people who follow the faith, who are Christians, and who oppose science or who find science difficult, it's really not the science that's the crux of the problem. It's really the way they read the Bible. And so I'm going to kind of focus on that area. I think the biggest problem with those Christians who deny science and who accept pseudoscience and who not just accept it, but celebrate it and even teach it, I think what they're doing is defending their understanding or their misunderstanding of what the Bible is and how it should be read. And so I kind of want to focus on that area, because you can teach the perfect science all you want, and you could tell them that there's Christians that actually accept science, so it's okay. And you still, until you can break down that misgiving about what the Bible is and how it should inform us, you're never going to make any progress. And so that's what I realized in these last few years, and more on that to come. Blessings, folks. We'll see you soon.